It began with fire, not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that ignites in words. In a tense, charged moment, Nancy Pelosi unleashed her fury at President Donald Trump, calling him the worst president for children in the history of this nation. The words fell heavy, cutting through the broadcast studio like shards of glass. Cameras zoomed in, Dana Bash blinked, the control room went still. But across the city, in the White House, the 47th President of the United States was watching, and he wasn't about to let it slide. His response would not just be political, it would be theatrical, devastating, and unforgettable. The date was October 8, 2025. Washington, D.C. pulsed with a strange electricity, the kind that only appears before a political storm. Outside the Capitol, reporters huddled under gray skies, phones glued to ears. Inside CNN's headquarters, Nancy Pelosi sat rigidly beneath the studio lights, her voice sharp, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "I want to say this clearly," she began, her chin lifted slightly. "Donald Trump is the worst president for children in American history." The statement hung in the air for a heartbeat. Even the camera operators hesitated before adjusting their shots. Then Pelosi leaned forward, her voice gaining force as she repeated the line, once, twice, a third time, each repetition echoing like a chant meant to brand itself into public consciousness. She launched into a blistering list of grievances: rising food insecurity, weakened healthcare protections, inequality in education, economic instability, environmental neglect, and gun violence. Her words came rapid fire, each one laced with moral indignation. As she spoke, her hands moved like a conductor's, sculpting the air with conviction. She tied every accusation back to democratic values. "We fight for children, for fairness, for the soul of this country," she declared, and even slipped in a sharp jab about upcoming redistricting battles. In the control room, producers whispered urgently. "We've got a headline moment," one said. Within seconds, CNN's clip hit the internet. And within minutes, the phrase "worst president" exploded across social media, trending #1 on X with tens of thousands of comments. Supporters hailed her as fearless. Critics mocked her as desperate. Independent voters simply sighed, "Here we go again." By the top of the hour, major news outlets were already dissecting the moment. MSNBC replayed the clip on loop, while Fox News labeled it Pelosi's meltdown. But far from the cameras, deep inside the West Wing, Donald J. Trump sat watching the replay on a large screen, arms crossed, eyes steady. His advisors glanced nervously at one another. The room was silent except for Pelosi's voice echoing through the speakers. When she finished her tirade, Trump smirked. "She asked for it," he said quietly. Those 4 words set off a chain reaction through the White House. Phones lit up, aides scrambled. Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt dashed between rooms, briefing staffers as cable networks replayed Pelosi's speech nonstop. Even Fox ran it with bold captions: "Pelosi attacks Trump, calls him worse for children." "How will he respond?" one staffer whispered. Trump, however, wasn't fuming, he was calculating. At the Resolute desk, he tapped his fingers on a folder labeled Operation Safe Return, his signature initiative that had reunited thousands of missing migrant children since January. "Pelosi thinks this is about kids," he muttered, "but it's about power. Always has been." He stood, pacing the Oval Office slowly. "She's spent decades pretending to care, building her fortune, trading stocks, smiling for cameras, while kids suffer in the streets she governs." Aides scribbled notes, unsure whether he was thinking aloud or dictating the first lines of his reply. Outside the White House, journalists gathered like moths to a flame. The rumor mill churned. Trump's preparing a direct response. Social media boiled. Hashtags collided. Hashtag protect the children. Hashtag Pelosi meltdown. Hashtag Trump responds. In the press room, Carolyn Leavitt turned to her deputy and whispered, "When he fires back, it won't be words. It'll be a statement the country never forgets." By noon, every TV network had cleared its schedule. News tickers flashed. Trump expected to respond to Pelosi attack live. Across America, anticipation spread like static. In a diner outside Columbus, truckers paused mid-bite, staring at the television. In Miami, families on the beach checked their phones for alerts. In San Francisco, Pelosi's own city, people gathered in cafes debating whether she'd gone too far. Meanwhile, Pelosi's communications team released a written statement doubling down on her remarks. Nancy Pelosi stands by her words. America's children deserve better than Donald Trump. Her allies applauded. Her opponents sharpened their knives. Back in the Oval Office, Trump's mood was almost cheerful. Melania and Barron had both texted encouragement. "You what you do best," Barron wrote. Trump smiled, then turned to his staff. "She's overplayed her hand," he said. "We're not just going to respond, we're going to expose." He pointed to the cameras being set up. Tonight, live from the Oval Office. No scripts, no teleprompter, straight truth. By 2:45 p.m., the White House had transformed. Bright studio lights gleamed off polished wood, flags stood proud behind the desk. Technicians tested microphones while Secret Service agents kept watch. The press corps buzzed. Carolyn Levitt approached the president. "This moment will define the rest of the year," she whispered. Trump nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. Nancy wanted a fight. She's about to get the truth. Meanwhile, across Capitol Hill, Pelosi's aides were glued to the screens. "If he takes this personal," one muttered. "We're finished." On X, memes erupted. Pelosi holding a megaphone captioned "Worst president" beside Trump's grin with "Careful what you wish for." At 3:15 p.m., the red light blinked on. Millions of Americans leaned closer to their screens. Trump appeared calm, serious, resolute. "Good afternoon," he began. "I saw Nancy Pelosi on CNN this morning, angry, shouting, calling me the worst president for children. Folks, can you believe this?" He paused just long enough for viewers to lean in. "It's October 8, 2025. Our borders are secure, our economy is thriving, gas is cheaper than a cup of coffee, and what does the radical left do? They trot out the Wicked Witch of the West herself to spew lies on national television." The remark triggered gasps and laughter. "She said it 3 times, like a spell," he continued, hoping the media would make it true. "But here's the reality. I've been fighting for American children since day one. She's been fighting for her portfolio." Viewers across the country froze. On cable panels, anchors leaned toward their earpieces as producers shouted, "This is classic Trump, bold and devastating." Trump's tone sharpened. Under Biden and Harris, more than 300,000 migrant children went missing. Many were trafficked, abused, lost in a system Pelosi helped build. And she said nothing. Not one tear, not one word. He paused, letting silence work its power. "When I returned to office this January, I launched Operation Safe Return, and in 6 months, we reunited over 150,000 children with their families. That's called leadership." A mother in Arizona whispered through tears, "That's my president." In bars, homes, and living rooms, people clapped. Trump leaned forward, his voice firm. "Nancy, you tore up my State of the Union on live TV like a spoiled child. You cheered chaos, but I gave this country hope, order, and safety. Who's the real threat to America's children?" He shifted gears. "Under my administration, child poverty hit record lows. Wages rose, parents thrived. Under the Democrats' so-called Build Back Better, families were crushed under inflation. Baby formula disappeared, groceries cost more than rent, and Pelosi smiled through it all." He pointed directly at the camera. "I brought prices down. I brought jobs home from China." Meanwhile, Nancy and her husband made millions trading stocks. While American parents struggled to feed their kids, Pelosi was cashing checks. Online, hashtags like #Pelosi Profits and #Trump for Families exploded. Reporters whispered, "This is a knockout." Trump lowered his voice, making the room lean in. "She says I failed children. But under my leadership, uninsured kids dropped to historic lows. Parents could afford doctors again. We made healthcare transparent, fair, and accessible. That's not failure, that's leadership." He turned the topic to safety. "We invested billions to protect schools. We gave mental health resources to struggling youth. In states that respected families and law enforcement, school shootings fell dramatically." Meanwhile, the blue city's Pelosi praises fell into chaos. Then he hit the environment. "We achieved the cleanest air and water in decades without destroying the economy through her Green New scam. We innovated. We grew. We kept kids healthy and families solvent." By now, even some Democrats watching in silence had goosebumps. Parents across the nation exchanged glances, some wiping tears. Then Trump leaned closer to the camera, his tone steady and piercing. Nancy Pelosi says I'm the worst for children. But I am their best hope, and no lie can erase that. He reached for a paper. Let's talk about who really profits off children's suffering. Remember Tesla? She bought stock days before electric car subsidies passed. Big Pharma? She sold shares just before new regulations. Coincidence? No. Corruption? Audiences gasped audibly. While American families chose between food and fuel, Pelosi's wealth ballooned from $30 million to over $250 million. And she calls me the danger to children. Trump's tone grew colder. This isn't about kids, it's about truth. Nancy Pelosi doesn't care about families, she cares about power, money, and control. She's lashing out because the American people have stopped believing her lies. The silence that followed was heavy. Trump looked directly into the camera, his voice dropping into something almost fatherly. Pelosi wept over Roe v. Wade but never shed a tear for the 60 million unborn children lost. She defended open borders that let fentanyl pour in, killing our youth. I fought to stop it. I fought for life, for safety, for families forgotten by Washington. Across the country, people sat frozen. In Pennsylvania, a father whispered, "He's telling the truth." Trump ended quietly, each word landing like thunder. Pelosi says I'm the worst president for children. But I've given them safety, hope, and a future. And that's something she can never take away, not with her lies, not with her speeches, and not with her politics. The broadcast ended. The red light dimmed. But America didn't move. For a moment, it was as if the entire nation held its breath, realizing it had just witnessed not another argument, but the beginning of a political war that would define the year 2025. On X, millions of Americans flooded the comments. Pelosi's done. Trump speaking from the heart. What had started as a political comeback had become something far more personal. By the time Trump delivered his third major speech, the atmosphere was electric. Networks scrambled, cutting between his Oval Office address and Pelosi's camp, where aides waited anxiously for her reply, but she said nothing. Her team sat frozen, eyes locked on the screen. She had already repeated the phrase "Trump is the worst president for children" 3 times on CNN, and now every word of it was being torn apart on live television. Trump seized the silence. "You called me the worst for children, Nancy? No, I'm the president who brought hope back to families, jobs back to homes, and safety back to our schools. I stood up for parents when Washington abandoned them." At home, viewers erupted. Some cheered, others cried. Across swing states, families felt something shift. Reporters whispered, "Pelosi looks cornered. She has no response." Trump leaned back, eyes fixed on the camera. "And that, Nancy, is why the people trust me. You can scream, you can lie, but truth always wins." The crowd roared. Pelosi's silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. Then Trump's tone hardened. "Let's not forget Nancy Pelosi made millions while claiming to serve the public. Her fortune soared while everyday Americans lived paycheck to paycheck. Public service, no, it was self-service." The words hit like thunder. Even veteran journalists looked stunned. "She talks about helping families," Trump continued, "but under Biden and Harris, groceries became unaffordable while Nancy and her husband profited from insider deals. America suffered, she thrived." In living rooms, parents nodded grimly. In Ohio, a mother holding her toddler whispered, "He's fighting for us. She's fighting for herself." Social media ignited. Hashtags like #Pelosi exposed trended worldwide. Side-by-side photos spread Pelosi smiling with her designer ice cream while families lined up at food banks. Trump's voice grew stronger. "Nancy, you wanted this fight. But tonight, America sees who you truly are. You can't hide behind CNN or your scripted speeches. The truth speaks louder." Even Democrats watching from home exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, Pelosi's polished image began to fracture on live television. Then Trump's tone softened, striking at something deeper. "When I returned to the White House in January 2025, I promised to bring children home safe, restore jobs, and give kids hope. And I kept that promise." Families wept with joy as their children were rescued at the border. Parents hugged their kids tighter because of what we accomplished. He paused, voice trembling. "But Nancy, where were you? You tore up my speech on live TV. You mocked the Americans who believed in this comeback. While parents prayed for safety, you played politics. Across the country, emotions overflowed. In Kansas, a father wiped his eyes. In Georgia, a grandmother clasped her hands and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for Trump." On X, posts poured in, "I'm crying right now. This is the truth no one else will say." Trump's tone rose again. "You said I was the worst for children, Nancy. I gave them a chance. I gave them a future. You gave them lies." The studio audience erupted. On CNN, Pelosi's silence grew heavier by the minute. By late afternoon, the nation was transfixed. Cafes, offices, and schools tuned in. In Pennsylvania, a teacher wiped her tears as Trump's words echoed through her classroom. "He's defending the kids," she whispered. Fox News anchors called it one of the most powerful rebuttals of Trump's career. CNN analysts fumbled for talking points, visibly shaken. Even MSNBC hosts admitted, reluctantly, he came prepared. Meanwhile, inside Pelosi's camp, panic spread. Advisors whispered about drafting a response, but the damage was done. Every word Trump spoke was trending, replayed millions of times. In the Oval Office, aides monitored the numbers. "Sir," one said, "the country's with you." Trump simply nodded, calm and firm. Then he turned back to the camera. "This isn't about politics. This is about America's children and the truth that can't be silenced. Nancy Pelosi tried to label me, but tonight, America has labeled her." The crowd roared again. Pelosi's silence was deafening. What had started as a comeback had become a total takeover. Trump straightened his notes but didn't glance at them. His words carried weight. For decades, Nancy Pelosi sat in Congress making promises: better schools, safer neighborhoods, more jobs, and delivered nothing but broken words and a swollen bank account. He leaned in, voice sharp. Nancy built her empire on the backs of struggling Americans. From San Francisco's crime-ridden streets to the chaos in Washington, her fingerprints are everywhere. She says, "I'm the worst for children." She looked away while kids in her own district lived among needles and crime. Gasps filled living rooms across the nation. On X, clips of San Francisco's streets spread under the tag #PLOSIsAmerica. Trump's tone grew harder. "The truth is, Nancy Pelosi never cared about America's children. She cared about her wine estate, her power, and her grip on Washington. But that grip is slipping, and tonight, America is watching it fall." The silence in Pelosi's office was total. The empire she had built over decades was collapsing. On live TV, newsrooms scrambled. Producers barked orders, anchors tried to fill airtime, but they couldn't stop replaying Trump's speech. On CNN, Dana Bash attempted to defend Pelosi, yet even her panelists looked uneasy. One muttered, "He's dismantling her point by point." At Fox, hosts leaned forward. "This," one said, "is a moment America will never forget." Meanwhile, across social media, ordinary Americans recorded themselves reacting, clapping, crying, shouting amen. A single mother in Kentucky went viral through tears. "Trump's the only one who ever stood up for kids like mine. Pelosi doesn't know us." Even neutral outlets conceded. Trump's counterpunch dominates the narrative. Inside Pelosi's headquarters, aides drafted statements in panic, but no words seemed strong enough. The truth was already echoing too loudly. Back in the Oval Office, Trump paused, took a sip of water, and stared into the lens. "America, don't be fooled by their lies. Tonight, truth is winning." As the address stretched into its second hour, something remarkable happened. The people's voices became louder than the networks. In diners, strangers applauded. In churches, congregations prayed. In factories, workers stopped to watch. In Florida, a grandmother sobbed, "I thought leaders forgot us, but he didn't. He's speaking for every child in this country." The online tide turned completely. #Trump for children over to #worst president. Posts showed collages of rescued migrant kids, new schools funded, and parents celebrating restored jobs. The energy was undeniable. Trump felt it too. His tone softened again, carrying conviction instead of anger. "I didn't return to the White House for myself. I came back for you, for your children, and for America's future. And no amount of lies from Nancy Pelosi can erase what we've built together." The cheers grew. For the first time that day, it was clear Pelosi's words hadn't just failed. They had backfired. Trump's gaze hardened once more, Let's talk about Nancy Pelosi's so-called public service. She spent decades in Washington and walked away a multimillionaire not from her salary, but from insider deals, time trades, and backroom favors. He paused, staring straight into the camera. While families lined up at food banks, Pelosi and her husband were buying Tesla stock days before her party pushed electric vehicle subsidies. While parents worried about medical bills, she profited from pharma trades. Gasps rippled through the room. Online, Americans shared screenshots of old headlines, connecting dots they had ignored. Trump's voice thundered. Nancy calls me the worst for children, but she made millions while children went hungry. Who's really failed America's kids? Pelosi's silence was louder than any denial. Her decades of power were unraveling before a nation that finally saw the truth. In homes across America, Trump's speech became more than politics, it became personal. In Ohio, a father hugged his son tightly, tears streaming down his face. Trump is fighting for children like you, he whispered. In Texas, a mother uploaded a clip of her kids praying for the president's strength. Within hours, it surpassed 1 million views, captioned, "Pelosi attacks, but Trump defends our future." The emotion sweeping across the nation was raw and real. Americans weren't just watching a confrontation, they were part of it. Every story Trump shared echoed their own lives. The gas they couldn't afford before his return, the failing schools their kids were trapped in, the jobs that had vanished. Even his usual critics looked uneasy. On MSNBC, one analyst admitted quietly, "Pelosi may have miscalculated. This is backfiring right before our eyes." Meanwhile, Trump's tone softened, almost paternal. "I know what it means to fight for children, because I've done it," he said calmly. "And I won't let career politicians like Nancy Pelosi take that away." Tears fell across living rooms nationwide. As Trump continued, Pelosi's team scrambled behind the scenes. Aides rushed to write responses, but every draft felt hollow beside his steady conviction. Even her allies avoided picking up her calls, unwilling to be tied to the fallout. On social media, clips of her CNN rant replayed beside Trump's measured, fact-filled answers. The contrast was brutal. Then Trump raised his hand for silence and delivered the line that would reverberate for years. "She said I'm the worst president for children." But let me remind you, under Nancy Pelosi's leadership, kids in her own city stepped over needles and slept on sidewalks. Under mine, their parents had jobs, schools were safer, and hope was real again. The crowd erupted, both in the room and online. Even moderate Democrats conceded privately. It was a devastating blow. Pelosi, usually fierce, sat motionless in her chair as her staff whispered nervously. The sound of cheering Americans drowned out the silence in her office. For the first time in years, Nancy Pelosi had nothing to say. She had always taken pride in being unflappable, but not tonight. Every sentence Trump spoke pierced deeper, exposing truths she thought would never surface. Her aides tried to push talking points into her hands, but she brushed them away, fingers trembling. Trump pressed forward. "You know what's tragic, Nancy? While you sit in your Napa mansion sipping $1,000 wine, parents in your own district can't even buy milk for their kids. You call me the worst for children. Take a look in the mirror." The words struck like glass shattering. Pelosi's composure cracked for the first time. Clips of her blank stare spread instantly on X with captions like "Pelosi silent, Trump roars." The longer she remained wordless, the worse it grew. Even Democratic insiders whispered that Trump had seized control of the narrative. Across America, families felt seen. Their frustrations, their daily struggles, all laid bare on national television. And the man defending them wasn't a pundit, it was their president. News networks went into overdrive, airing split screens. Pelosi repeating "worst president for children" beside Trump listing statistics about poverty reduction, school choice, and family security. The contrast was cutting. In North Carolina, a teacher filmed herself watching the speech. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Finally, someone's saying it. Our kids deserve better," and Trump's proving it. In Michigan, auto workers gathered during a break, cheering. One shouted, "He's fighting for our kids just like he fought for our jobs." Online, the movement became unstoppable. Hashtags like #TrumpForChildren and #PelosiExposed dominated the trends. Memes compared Pelosi's expression to empty classrooms, juxtaposed with Trump shaking hands with students. Even CNN anchors looked uneasy. This isn't going the way Pelosi expected, one admitted reluctantly. Sensing the shift, Trump slowed his delivery. His voice softened again, resonant and deliberate. America, tonight isn't about politics, he said. It's about truth. It's about who truly stands for your children's future, and I promise you, I always will. Applause thundered through the room as millions at home wiped tears from their faces. Behind the scenes, Pelosi's phone buzzed constantly, but the messages weren't comforting. Allies who once stood shoulder to shoulder with her now hesitated. One senator texted bluntly, "This isn't good. He's landing punches we can't counter." On Capitol Hill, Democrats huddled together in silence, watching muted screens as Trump's words rolled across the ticker. Fear, doubt, and realization spread across their faces. Pelosi had overplayed her hand. Trump delivered the closing strike with unshakable calm. She thought she could destroy me with lies. But America knows better. You don't judge a president by empty rhetoric, you judge by results. And under my leadership, families are stronger, children are safer, and this nation shines brighter. The Oval Office erupted in cheers. Pelosi stared blankly at the screen, her lips pressed tight, her complexion pale. The image of her silent, frozen face became the night's most shared clip. For the first time in her long career, the once untouchable Pelosi looked trapped, and America watched it unfold live. The night shifted from political theater to raw emotion. Trump leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice so each word struck like truth itself. You say I'm the worst president for children? Let me tell you, Nancy, I've looked into the eyes of parents who lost their kids to fentanyl pouring across the border under your failed policies. I've hugged mothers desperate for baby formula while your party wasted time on empty agendas, and I promised them, never again. The room went still. At home, viewers felt the weight of every syllable. In Ohio, a mother clutched her daughter tightly and whispered, "That's us. He's talking about us." Pelosi fidgeted, blinking rapidly as cameras zoomed in. Her silence screamed louder than any insult she had thrown earlier. Online, emotions overflowed. A viral post read, "For the first time in years, I cried listening to a president. Trump is defending our children." This was no longer a political showdown. It had become a battle for the nation's heart. Across the country, families began sharing their stories in real time. In Texas, a veteran father recorded a trembling video. Pelosi doesn't understand what it's like to lose a son to drugs. Trump does. He fights for us. That's why I stand with him. In Pennsylvania, a nurse tweeted, "I work with sick kids every day." Trump's reforms gave families coverage we desperately needed. Pelosi's words cut like a knife, and he's right to call her out. America wasn't just watching anymore. They were feeling it. And by the end of that night, it was clear, something had changed forever. At the CNN studio, Dana Bash tried to signal a commercial break, but a producer leaned over and whispered, "Don't. The ratings are breaking records." The world was glued to every frame. Trump's words grew sharper, yet carried compassion. "Children aren't political pawns," he said firmly. "They're America's future. And every time you try to smear me, Nancy, you insult the families who already know the truth." The audience erupted. Applause thundered. Some people stood, wiping tears from their faces. On screen, Pelosi remained motionless, caught in the harshest spotlight of her career. By this point, the entire nation was watching. Fox News flashed banners reading "Trump defends America's children." Even CNN couldn't ignore the shift. Pelosi stumbles as Trump fights back. In homes across America, families argued around their televisions. Some cheered Trump's defense. Others sat in disbelief, unwilling to admit Pelosi had lost control. But one fact was undeniable. The emotion flooding the country was unlike anything seen in years. Clips of Pelosi's original "worst president for children" remark replayed beside Trump's response. The contrast was searing: bitterness versus conviction, anger versus empathy. In Florida, a grandmother typed through tears, "I raised 6 kids. I know sincerity when I see it. Tonight, I saw it in Trump." Trump ended that segment with a line that struck deep. "America's children are not bargaining chips, Nancy. They are the heartbeat of this nation, and I will never let you or anyone else forget that." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping so loudly it drowned out the broadcast feed. Pelosi's silence had become her undoing. Even inside CNN, the studio filled with applause as Trump's words echoed like thunder across America. What began as a clash had turned into a turning point. Pelosi's face remained tight, her silence more damning than any argument she could make. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of discomfort. Trump motioned for quiet. "This isn't about politics," he said softly. "It's about our children, our future, and I will fight for them with everything I have." His voice cracked slightly, emotion raw. For a fleeting moment, America didn't see a politician. They saw a father, a grandfather, a man burdened by love for the nation's children. On X, a young mother's post went viral. "I lost my son to fentanyl. Tonight, I cried because Trump gave him a voice, something Pelosi never cared to hear." Within an hour, it had over 3 million likes. The roar of the people was unmistakable. The story was no longer about Pelosi's attacks. It was about Trump's defense of America's children. The debate that was meant to highlight her passion had instead consumed her. She shuffled her papers, forcing a smile, but each second of silence stretched like an eternity. Trump turned slightly toward her, lowering his voice so his words landed with precision. "You repeat your insults like a chant, Nancy," he said quietly, "but where are your results? Where are the children you helped, the families you lifted up? There are none, and that's the truth." Gasps filled the room. Some stood, some cried openly. Pelosi adjusted her microphone, but her hands trembled. She glanced toward the stage's edge, searching for help that wasn't coming. Across the country, people felt the gravity of the moment. In Iowa, a farmer turned to his wife and said, "This is history. We'll never forget it." In Arizona, a grandmother whispered through tears, "Finally, someone is fighting for the little ones." Pelosi, once the picture of control, now looked small and powerless. Trump, steady and unflinching, seemed larger than life. The night reached its peak. Trump leaned toward the microphone, voice steady but full of passion. "You call me the worst president for children. No, Nancy. I am the president who fought for them when no one else would. I gave them hope, safety, and a brighter tomorrow. And tonight, America knows the truth." The room exploded in cheers. Chants of "For the children. For the children" filled the air. Across the nation, families hugged one another, crying, feeling seen, defended, and understood. Pelosi sat frozen, her words lost in the shadow of Trump's overwhelming comeback. When CNN finally cut to commercial, it was too late. The internet had already crowned the winner. Clips of Trump's speech surged through every platform, inspiring tears, prayers, and praise. Yes, the country was divided, but millions felt united by one undeniable truth: Trump had spoken from the heart. And to those watching online, the moment didn't end there. If this story moved you, if it made you believe again, the narrator's voice urged, don't just scroll away. Like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell us how Trump's words touched you tonight. And if you want more behind-the-scenes stories, deeper insights, and exclusive features, join the movement. Because this isn't just a speech, this is history, and you're part of it.